In the quiet suburbs of Chicago, where everything seems perfect on the surface, lies a story of betrayal, heartbreak, and a thirst for revenge that will leave you questioning the very essence of trust. This is not just a tale of infidelity. It's a journey into the darkest corners of the human soul. Can you handle the truth? Stay tuned to find out how one man's life unraveled and how he sought retribution in the most unexpected ways. This is the story of Jack Sullivan, a man who had it all until he didn't. From the moment he discovered the truth, his life became a twisted game of cat and mouse. But what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? Keep watching to the end, because the final twist will leave you speechless. Chapter 1. A Life of Illusions. In the tranquil suburbs of Chicago, I, Jack Sullivan, had built a life that many would envy. As an architect, I had designed not only buildings, but also a seemingly perfect life with my wife, Emily Harper. We were the couple that others looked up to, the ones who seemed to have it all figured out. Our home was a sanctuary of warmth and love, or so I thought. Every morning I would wake up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the sound of Emily humming in the kitchen. We would share breakfast, discuss our plans for the day, and part with a kiss. It was a routine that I cherished, a routine that felt unbreakable. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in Emily's behavior. She started coming home later than usual, often claiming it was due to work. Her phone, once left casually on the table, was now always within her reach, its screen often lighting up with messages that she quickly dismissed. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my gut, dismissing it as paranoia. But the signs were there, subtle yet persistent. One evening, as I sat alone in our living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. I decided to confront Emily, hoping that my fears were unfounded. But as I opened my mouth to speak, she walked in, her eyes avoiding mine. That moment marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it yet. Chapter 2. The First Crack. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared one evening when I noticed Emily's car parked outside a cafe downtown. It was a place we used to visit together, a place filled with memories. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go inside. As I entered, I saw her sitting at a table near the window, her back to me. Across from her sat a man, his face familiar yet unplaceable. They were deep in conversation, their heads close together. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them, a sense of betrayal washing over me. I approached the table, my legs feeling like lead. Emily looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Jack," she stammered, "what are you doing here?" The man turned to look at me, and recognition dawned on me. It was Mark Johnson, her ex-boyfriend. Before I could say anything, Emily quickly introduced him as a colleague. But the way they looked at each other told a different story. I felt a surge of anger and confusion, but I forced myself to remain calm. "We need to talk," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily nodded, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. As we left the cafe, I couldn't help but feel that my world was crumbling around me. The drive home was silent, the air thick with tension. I knew then that my life would never be the same. Chapter 3. The Unraveling Truth. The days that followed the incident at the cafe were a blur of suspicion and denial. Emily and I existed in a tense standoff, each of us avoiding the inevitable confrontation. I found myself constantly replaying the scene in my mind, each time feeling the sting of betrayal anew. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the silence between us was deafening. I couldn't bear it any longer. "Who is he, Emily?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of defiance and guilt. "He's just a friend, Jack," she replied, her voice steady but lacking conviction. "We work together, that's all." I wanted to believe her, to cling to the hope that our marriage was still intact. But the image of them sitting together, their heads close, haunted me. I decided to dig deeper. I began to notice small things sure sudden interest in her appearance. The late-night phone calls she took in another room. The way she would quickly close her laptop when I entered the room. Each discovery was a punch to the gut, each one chipping away at the trust I had in her. One night, As she slept beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I reached for her phone, which she had left on the nightstand. My heart raced as I unlocked it, knowing that what I was doing was a violation of her privacy. But I needed to know the truth. As I scrolled through her messages, my worst fears were confirmed. There were texts between her and Mark, messages filled with affection and promises of meeting up. My hands shook as I read them, each word a dagger to my heart. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I had to fight the urge to wake her up and confront her right then and there. Instead, I took screenshots of the messages, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I knew I needed proof, something tangible to confront her with. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I felt a deep sense of betrayal and anger. My world had been turned upside down, and I was determined to find out how long this had been going on. Chapter 4. The Weight of Evidence. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart, the weight of what I had discovered pressing down on me. Emily was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. I watched her for a moment, feeling a strange mix of familiarity and estrangement. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. The silence between us was thick with unspoken words and accusations. Finally, I broke the silence. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. Emily looked up, her expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "About what?" she asked, though I could tell she knew exactly what I was going to say. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation that would change everything. "I know about Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened in shock, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "I saw the messages, Emily. I know you've been lying to me." Her face crumpled, and she looked away, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. It just happened." I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but I forced myself to remain calm. "How long?" I asked, my voice cold and hard. She hesitated, and I could see the guilt written all over her face. "A few months," she finally admitted. The words hit me like a physical blow. Months. For months, she had been lying to me, carrying on with another man while I remained oblivious. I felt a deep sense of shame and anger, not just at her, but at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. We spent the next few hours in a tense, emotional conversation. Emily tried to explain to justify her actions, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive her. Not yet. I needed time to process everything, to figure out what this meant for our future. As the day wore on, I found myself retreating into a shell of numbness. I went through the motions of my daily routine, but my mind was elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of betrayal and loss. I knew I had a decision to make, one that would shape the rest of my life. Chapter 5. The Calm Before the Storm. The days that followed were a strange mix of normalcy and tension. On the surface, everything seemed the same. We went to work, came home, and interacted with each other as if nothing had changed. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. I found myself constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Emily tried to engage with me, to bridge the gap that had formed between us, but I couldn't bring myself to reciprocate. I was still processing the betrayal, still trying to make sense of it all. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Emily turned to me with a determined look in her eyes. "We need to talk about this, Jack," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We can't just pretend nothing happened." I sighed, knowing she was right. We needed to address the elephant in the room, to figure out where we stood. "I know," I replied, my voice heavy with resignation. "But I need more time. I need to understand why." Emily nodded, her expression softening. "I get that," she said, "and I want to help you understand. But we can't do that if you won't talk to me." I knew she was right, but the thought of delving into the details of her infidelity made my stomach churn. I needed to find a way to move past the anger and hurt, to see things from her perspective. But it was hard. So hard. In the days that followed, we began to have more open conversations. Emily explained that her relationship with Mark had started as a friendship, a connection she had been missing in our marriage. She admitted that she had let it go too far, that she had made a mistake. As she spoke, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion, and even a glimmer of understanding. I realized that our marriage had been far from perfect, that we had both contributed to the distance that had grown between us. But that didn't excuse her actions, and I was still struggling to come to terms with them. Despite the pain, I felt a small sense of relief. We were finally talking, finally addressing the issues that had been plaguing us. It was a start, a fragile one, but a start nonetheless. Chapter 6. The Decision. As the weeks passed, the tension in our home began to ease, but the shadow of Emily's betrayal lingered. We were trying to rebuild, to find a new normal, but the trust that had been shattered was not so easily repaired. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to me with a hopeful look in her eyes. "Do you think we can get through this, Jack?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I took a deep breath, considering her question. The truth was, I didn't know. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to move past this and try to rebuild our marriage. But another part of me, a deeper, more wounded part, wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. "I want to," I finally said, my voice honest and raw, "but I don't know if I can. I need time to figure out what I want, what I need." Emily nodded, her expression a mix of understanding and sadness. "I get that," she said, "and I'll give you all the time you need. But I want you to know that I am committed to making this work, to proving to you that I am worth another chance." Her words touched me, but they also highlighted the enormity of the decision I had to make. Could I forgive her? Could I trust her again? These were questions that haunted me, that kept me up at night. In the days that followed, I found myself weighing the pros and cons, trying to imagine a future with and without Emily. I talked to friends, seeking their advice and perspective. Some urged me to leave, to find someone who would never betray me. Others encouraged me to stay, to work through the issues and try to rebuild. As I listened to their advice, I realized that the decision was mine alone to make. No one else could tell me what was right for me, what would make me happy. I needed to follow my heart, even if it led me down a difficult path. One night, as I lay in bed, I came to a decision. I needed to take a step back to give myself the space to heal and think. I decided to take a break from our marriage, to spend some time apart and figure out what I truly wanted. Chapter 7. The Separation. The decision to separate was one of the hardest I had ever made. As I packed my bags, Emily watched me with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Are you sure this is what you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I paused, looking at her, the woman I had loved for so many years. "I need this," I replied, my voice firm but gentle. "I need to figure out what I want, what I need to be happy." Emily nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand," she said, her voice trembling, "and I'll respect your decision. But please, don't give up on us completely." I felt a pang of guilt and sadness, but I knew this was the right choice for me. I needed time to heal, to process everything that had happened. I needed to find myself again, to rediscover who I was outside of our marriage. I moved into a small apartment in the city, a place that was mine alone. It was a stark contrast to the home I had shared with Emily, but it was a fresh start, a chance to begin anew. The first few nights were the hardest, the silence of the apartment amplifying the loneliness I felt. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to find a rhythm. I threw myself into my work, using it as a distraction from the pain and uncertainty that plagued me. I reconnected with old friends, went to the gym, and even took up a few new hobbies. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. During this time, I also did a lot of soul searching. I reflected on our marriage, on the good times and the bad. I thought about what had led us to this point and what I wanted for my future. It was a difficult process, but it was necessary. As I navigated this new chapter in my life, I realized that I had a lot of unresolved feelings. I was angry, hurt, and confused, but I also still loved Emily. I missed her, missed the life we had built together, but I also knew that things could never go back to the way they were. Chapter 8. The Revelation. As I settled into my new life, I found a sense of peace that had been missing for a long time. The separation had given me clarity, and I began to see things more clearly. I realized that while I still cared for Emily, I needed to prioritize my own well-being and happiness. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into an old friend, Sarah. We had lost touch over the years, but she had always been someone I could confide in. We decided to grab a coffee and catch up. As we sat in the cafe, Sarah asked me how I was doing. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. I told her everything about Emily's betrayal, our separation, and the emotional turmoil I had been through. It was a relief to finally talk to someone who understood. As I spoke, Sarah listened intently, her expression a mix of sympathy and concern. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I am so sorry, Jack," she said, her voice gentle. "You deserve so much better." Her words touched me, and I felt a sense of gratitude for her support. We spent the next few hours talking, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories about our lives. It was a welcome distraction, and I found myself enjoying her company. As we were leaving, Sarah turned to me with a thoughtful look. "You know, Jack," she said, "sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the best outcomes. Maybe this is a chance for you to find something even better." Her words stuck with me long after we parted ways. I realized that she was right. The separation from Emily had been painful, but it had also opened up new possibilities. I began to see that there was a life beyond my marriage, a life that I could build for myself. Chapter 9. The Turning Point. The conversation with Sarah marked a turning point for me. Her words resonated deeply, and I began to embrace the idea that this separation could be a new beginning. I started to focus on myself, on what I truly wanted and needed in life. I decided to take a step back from the chaos and spend some time alone, away from the city. I rented a small cabin by the lake, a place where I could reflect and find some peace. The days I spent there were transformative. I went for long walks in the woods, sat by the water, and allowed myself to feel everything I had been holding back. During this time, I also began to write. I poured my thoughts and emotions into a journal, a cathartic process that helped me make sense of everything that had happened. I wrote about my pain, my anger, and my confusion, but also about my hopes and dreams for the future. As I wrote, I realized that I had been living my life on autopilot, going through the motions without truly being present. The betrayal had been a wake-up call, a harsh reminder that life was too short to settle for anything less than happiness. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I had an epiphany. I realized that I had been holding on to the past, clinging to a relationship that had been broken long before Emily's infidelity. I understood that I needed to let go, to forgive not just Emily, but myself as well. This realization was both liberating and terrifying. It meant accepting that my marriage was over, that I had to move on and build a new life for myself. But it also meant that I had the power to shape my future, to create a life that was true to who I was. Chapter 10. The Return. After spending a week at the cabin, I returned to the city with a renewed sense of purpose. I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the clarity and resolve I had gained during my time away. The first thing I did was meet with Emily. We met at a small cafe, a neutral location that felt safe and comfortable. As I walked in, I saw her sitting at a table, her expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "Hi," she said softly as I sat down across from her. "How are you?" "I am doing better," I replied, offering her a small smile. I needed some time to think, to figure things out. Emily nodded, her eyes searching mine for answers. "And did you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would change everything. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I have. And I think it's time we talked about the future." Emily's eyes widened, and I could see the fear and hope warring in her expression. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling a mix of emotion, sadness, nostalgia, and a sense of finality. "I think we need to let go," I said gently. "We need to accept that our marriage is over and move on." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, understanding the truth in my words. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been thinking the same thing. I just didn't want to admit it." We spent the next few hours talking, sharing our thoughts and feelings, and saying goodbye to the life we had built together. It was a painful but necessary process, one that allowed us to find closure and begin to heal. As we parted ways, I felt a sense of relief. It was the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new chapter. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to face it with a newfound sense of strength and resilience. Chapter 11. A New Dawn. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and challenges that pushed me out of my comfort zone. I also made a conscious effort to reconnect with friends and family, nurturing the relationships that truly mattered. As I moved forward, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the future. I began to explore new interests and hobbies, discovering passions I knew I had. I took up photography, something I had always been curious about but never pursued. I found joy in capturing moments, in seeing the world through a different lens. I also started volunteering at a local community center, helping underprivileged children with their homework and organizing activities. It was a rewarding experience, one that gave me a sense of purpose and fulfillment. I realized that I had been so focused on my own problems that I had forgotten about the world around me. As I continued on this path, I found myself growing stronger and more resilient. I learned to embrace change, to see it as an opportunity for growth rather than a threat. I also learned to forgive, not just Emily, but myself as well. I understood that we all make mistakes, that we are all human. One evening, as I was leaving the community center, I ran into Sarah again. We had kept in touch over the months, and she had become a close friend and confidant. As we walked together, she turned to me with a smile. "You seem different," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "I feel different," I replied, returning her smile. "I feel like I am finally where I am supposed to be." Sarah nodded, her expression one of understanding and support. "I am glad," she said. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." Her words touched me, and I felt a deep sense of gratitude for her friendship. As we parted ways, I realized that I had found something I hadn't even known I was looking for: a sense of peace and contentment. Looking back, I understood that the journey I had been on was not just about healing from betrayal, but about discovering who I truly was. It was about learning to let go of the past and embrace the present, about finding strength in vulnerability and joy in the simple things. As I stood there, watching the sun set over the city, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, but I was ready to face it with open arms. I had learned that life is unpredictable, but it is also full of possibilities. And sometimes, the hardest moments can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Betrayal can break us, but it can also be the catalyst for change. It can force us to confront our deepest fears and insecurities, to question everything we thought we knew. But in the end, it is up to us to decide how we respond. Will we let it define us, or will we use it as a stepping stone to a better future? The choice is yours. If you've been through a similar journey, share your story in the comments below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge you to think differently. Subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.